June 22, 1994, Pasadena, California. 90,000 fans packed into the Rose Bowl Stadium to watch Colombia face the United States at the FIFA World Cup. Colombia entered the tournament as one of football's most exciting teams, with many experts predicting a deep run. But in the 34th minute, defender Andrés Escobar stretched out his leg to block and accidentally deflected the ball into his own net. 10 days later, he was dead. Shot 6 times in a parking lot in Medellín, and with every bullet, the killer reportedly shouted one word: "Ghoul." This is Murk Vault. Subscribe if you're new, because this is the kind of story the football world never forgot. This is the story of Andrés Escobar, a man known as the gentleman of football. A man who played with dignity in a country drowning in violence, and a man who paid the ultimate price for one single moment on a football pitch. To understand what happened, you have to understand who Andrés Escobar was, not just as a player, but as a person. While many football stars chased fame, Andrés Escobar was different. Teammates described him as quiet, humble, and deeply respectful. He rarely argued with referees. He rarely made headlines off the pitch. In a country torn apart by violence, Andrés represented something rare: decency. He had joined Atlético Nacional as a teenager and quickly became one of South America's most respected defenders. He wasn't flashy. He didn't score spectacular goals or celebrate wildly. He just did his job, calmly, professionally, every single time. In 1994, Colombia wasn't just carrying football expectations into the World Cup. The country was fighting a reputation built by cartels, kidnapping, and decades of violence. For millions of Colombians, the World Cup felt like a chance to show the world a different face. And Andrés Escobar was the face they were proudest to show. But behind Colombia's golden generation, something darker was at work. At the time, drug traffickers invested heavily in several clubs, bringing money, influence, and controversy into Colombian football. Enormous sums had been placed on Colombia's World Cup performance. These weren't casual bets. These were the kind of wagers where losing could have consequences far beyond football. Reports emerged that players and their families were facing intimidation and threats as pressure mounted ahead of the tournament. The players knew the weight they were carrying. They played anyway. On June 22, 1994, Colombia faced the United States in a must-win group stage match. The pressure was already suffocating. They had lost their opening match against Romania, and the threats from back home had already begun. Then it happened. The cross came in low and fast. For a fraction of a second, Andrés Escobar reacted exactly as any defender would. He stretched out his right leg to stop the danger. Football can be cruel. Ball touched his boot and changed direction. Time seemed to slow down. The goalkeeper moved the wrong way. The crowd gasped. Then the ball rolled into the net. An own goal. Escobar stood frozen. No anger. No excuses, no dramatic reaction, just silence. In that moment, nobody inside the Rose Bowl knew they were watching the first step toward a tragedy that would shock the entire world. Colombia lost 2-1. The World Cup dream was over. Back in Colombia, the reaction was instant and violent. Death threats flooded in. Fans burned effigies. The players were not just failures. They were targets. Friends begged Andrés not to go back. Some feared the anger waiting at home. Others feared something far worse, but Andrés refused to hide. He believed Colombians would understand. He believed that football is a game and that people would move on. Before leaving the United States, he wrote a column for a Colombian newspaper. In it, he addressed his country directly, acknowledging the pain, asking for patience, and expressing his belief that life goes on. He boarded the plane home. On the evening of July 1st, 1994, just 10 days after the own goal, Escobar went out with friends to a bar in the El Poblado neighborhood of Medellín. Andrés seemed calm, almost unusually calm. He had no bodyguards, no security detail, just a footballer, out with friends, heading home. It was nearly 3 in the morning. The streets of Medellín were quieter than usual. Andrés walked toward his car alone. 3 men appeared in the parking lot. An argument broke out. Voices were raised. Then 2 of the men drew handguns. Andrés Escobar was shot 6 times with a .38 caliber pistol. After every shot, the killer shouted, "Goal!" mimicking the commentator who had repeated that word 6 times over the sound of the own goal just 10 days earlier. He was taken to hospital. He died 45 minutes later. He was 27 years old. His funeral was attended by more than 120,000 people. The man arrested that night was Humberto Castro Muñoz, a bodyguard and driver for Santiago Gallón, a man allegedly connected to the Medellín cartel who had reportedly lost large sums betting on Colombia. Castro confessed the following day. He was convicted and sentenced to 43 years, but released after serving just 11. Santiago Gallón himself spent only 15 months in prison, never brought to trial for the murder. He was later linked to paramilitary groups and drug trafficking networks. He lived freely for decades. Andrés Escobar never won a World Cup. He never became football's biggest star. He never lifted the trophy his country dreamed of. Yet more than 3 decades later, millions still remember his name. Not because of an own goal, not because of a mistake, but because he faced hatred with dignity. Just days before his death, he wrote, "Life does not end here." For him, it did, but for the world, his story never ended. In Colombia, Andrés Escobar is still remembered as the gentleman of football. Not because he was perfect, but because he remained dignified when the world around him wasn't. One mistake on a football field should never become a death sentence. Yet in 1994, for Andrés Escobar, it did. Comment Caballero below if you think he deserved better, because he did. And if there's a dark story, forgotten mystery, or hidden truth you want Murk Vault to uncover next, leave it in the comments below. I read every suggestion. Your idea might become the next video on this channel. This is Murk Vault, where hidden truths are brought into the light.